So Tna Impact took place once again in Orlando, Florida. The show starts with the Black Brigade backstage looking for Samoa Joe. Kenny King in one part of the zone, and Montel Porter and Robert Lashley in another. While the Brigade searches for their target, the target comes down to the ring. Joe says that if Porter wants to come at him, he's right there. So the Black Brigade come down to the ring. King takes the mic and tells Joe that Porter is the boss and doesn't need to hear any more bitches crying. Joe shuts King down and tells Porter that if King is going to speak for him, he should insert himself up Joe's ass. Porter tells Joe to state his business, and Joe responds with name-calling. He goes on to say that he saw Porter as someone that would make the company better and not become the typical juice-seeking power lord. Porter reminds Joe that he gave him a chance to win the world title by putting him in the gauntlet match that was won by Eric Young, but Joe chose not to be there. Joe wants to beat up the Brigade by himself, but then Austin Aries comes out. As Aries walks down the entranceway, he tells Porter that he's avoiding Joe directly and only wants to create situations in which the Brigade have the advantage. Porter tells Aries that Joe has violated his employment services contract and that he can't do anything. Aries says that he can do something because he has the juice. Porter says that Joe and Aries will face each other in a match and that if Joe wins, he'll be back on the roster and Aries will be gone from the company. If Aries wins, Joe will be dismissed permanently. This was a decent segment, with the main point being the detailed reasoning behind Joe's beef with Porter. Joe claims that Porter tried to deny him a return title shot, and Porter comes back at him with the gauntlet match rhetoric. That was fine. However, a good match on paper between Joe and Aries will likely be ruined by the predictable fuckery that would be obvious. So it's hard to get up for this match. So then we see Magnus and Bram. Magnus wants to know if Bram is set for his match against Jeff Willow. Bram acknowledges that he is with a smile. And Magnus tells him that he should take Willow seriously because he's not Jeff Hardy and that he's dealing with someone more maniacal. He adds that Hardy became Willow after he won the world title. Bram tells Magnus that he popped for him when that happened, but being the champ made him a pussy. Bram says that Magnus needs to go back in time and become his old buddy again, and if not, he'll take advantage of Magnus's apprehension. Once again, Bram continues to bash Magnus's head with his need to become a wild boy again, and eventually Magnus will have to give in. The only issue is that if this angle could involve a few other opponents other than Jeff Willow, then it would stay somewhat fresh instead of feeling redundant. So then we have Bram versus Jeff Willow. Okay match. The match ends with Willow and Bram outside the ring, and Willow launching himself from the ring steps and hitting Bram with a hip check against the guard rail. Willow throws Bram's head into the ring steps, and Bram ends up stretched out on the steps. Willow launches himself over the top rope, but Bram moves out of the way and Willow bangs his arm on the steps. Bram grabs a pry bar from under the ring, goes back in, and waits for Willow, who is favoring his arm, to get up. Suddenly Magnus appears and stops Bram. He slowly grabs the pry bar, then attacks Willow with it. Bram sadistically approves as he watches Magnus pound Willow and leave him laying. Bram and Magnus celebrate. This is the progression that needed to happen. Magnus has broken through the barrier of resistance and has become Bram's true boy. The next step now is to build them as a solid tag team so that they can become eventual contenders to the American Wolves and the World Tag Team Championship. So then we see the American Wolves sitting in Montel Porter's space as he walks in. Davey Richards tells Porter that instead of being the guy that was supposed to represent the wrestlers, he chose to be a representative of the Cash Money Brothers. Porter tells Richards and Eddie Edwards that he got them into the company and paved the way for them to become champions. He decides to put them in a match against each other, and if they refuse, they will be stripped of the belts. Here is the same scenario as the upcoming match between Samoa Joe and Austin Aries. A good match on paper that should be a good match under normal circumstances, but here it won't be with the bullshit included. So then we see Mr. Anderson backstage, dressed in a cowboy costume. He likes beer. Next. So then we have Davey Richards versus Eddie Edwards. Decent match based on the fact that it was pure chain wrestling. Nothing more. Kenny King was present during the match, threatening to have Porter put the belts on the glorified jobbers if they didn't try to hurt each other. Eddie Edwards ends up pinning Davey Richards for the 3 with a roll-up. King comes down to the ring and tells Richards and Edwards that he's not satisfied with their match performance. The American Wolves give King the alarm clock. First, the idea of giving the belts to the jobbers is too laughable to even analyze. Second, if Richards and Edwards didn't wrestle the way Porter wanted them to, why didn't he strip them of the belts as he had threatened? Yet another logical hole in Porter's power presentation. Third, why is Kenny King doing the driving here instead of Porter? Speaking of Porter, we see him backstage with Dixie Carter. Dixie nags him about the Joe Aries match as she questions his decision making. He tells her to shut up and chill. A brief but pointless segment. Porter's in charge, Dixie's not. Next. So then we see Madison Rayne and Brittany. Brittany offers Madison her help for her title rematch against Angelina Love. Madison doesn't want her to do anything. Of course, Brittany will make herself present, but what will she do or not do? So then we see the glorified jobbers and Zema Ion backstage. Robbie E is afraid of clowns. Next. After we see Montel Porter telling Brian Hebner to ensure a clean winner for Joe versus Aries, and after we see a prep promo with Samoa Joe and Austin Aries, we see a segment that for some reason made it out of the room where the TNA creative meetings are held. Now this could be applied to other segments that they have approved, but this one tops those. This was a segment featuring the glorified jobbers with Zema Ion and the Menagerie, based on Robbie E's fear of clowns. This actually made it out of the TNA creative room. Note the TNA creative. If you are trying to convince everyone that Vince Russo isn't getting his ideas through, don't repeat this. So then we see Bully Ray, Eric Young, and Brian Hebner backstage. Young tells Hebner that he should put the livelihoods of the wrestlers first and not allow Montel Porter's puppet pulling to affect that. Bully Ray tells Junior to think about that, and Junior says that he'll keep his job however he has to. Bully Ray says that they'll involve themselves if need be. More potential fuckery added to potential fuckery that's already ready to be unleashed for the Joe Aries match. So then we see Gunner and Sam Shaw at the bin playing Go Fish. Go Fish. Gunner really appeared as if he was forcing this. He looked like he didn't want to do it. This storyline needs to progress more so than it has because it's stalling. Note number 2, the TNA creative. Go Fish? So then we see, or rather we have, Austin Aries versus Samoa Joe. The loser is gone from the company. Okay match because of the fact that the fuckery was coming. The match ends with Aries attempting the brain buster on Joe, but Joe counters with a standing front suplex. He charges the corner and hits Aries with an elbow, then nails him with an enziguri. Joe goes for the muscle buster, but Aries stops him and grabs his head, then brings his neck down on the top rope as he lands outside, which sends Joe back to the mat. Aries hits Joe with a forearm and pushes him into the corner. He hits Joe with punches, comes out of the corner and charges, but Joe goes for an enziguri. Instead, Aries arm bars him and nails him with a discus forearm. He rolls Joe up and converts that into a bridging arm triangle choke. Eric Young comes running to the ring and pulls Junior out of the ring, preventing him from calling a possible submission on Joe. Young and Junior argue about Junior saving talent integrity. Meanwhile, Joe has applied the rear naked choke on Aries. Hebner goes back into the ring, but Young pulls him out again, and they resume the jawing. Bully Ray comes down to the ring and punches out Junior. Young gets on the mic and says that Hebner had to get knocked out in order to save the jobs of Aries and Joe. Bully Ray takes the mic and apologizes to Junior, but then the Black Brigade come out onto the stage. Montel Porter threatens to let Bully Ray go, and Bully Ray tells him that he's made the zone a shithole. He goes on to propose a match, pitting himself, Young, Aries, and Joe versus the Black Brigade and Ethan Carter III. Young whispers into Bully Ray's ear, and Bully Ray suggests that the match should be an 8-man first blood match. Porter says no, but King grabs his mic and says yes. Montel Porter is the director of wrestling operations, right? That means he's the boss, right? That means he decides what matches take place, right? So because Kenny King said so, the match that Porter said no to is going to happen anyway. Where is the absolute power that Porter is supposed to have? Recent TNA logical holes have been large enough for a truck to go through, but now locomotives are passing through with ease. The fact that Aries and Joe will be wrestling in a second match explains why they held back in this one, even with the bullshit. So then we see Mr. Anderson backstage again, dressed in his cowboy costume, and he says that he likes beer again. So then we see Christy Hemme introduce James Storm, but Mr. Anderson comes to the ring in his cowboy costume. Somewhere in this muck, there was a purpose for this segment. Storm ends this by giving Anderson a super kick after a decent brawl. Pseudo progression for an uninteresting program. And these two are meeting at Slammiversary. So then we see Gunner and Sam Shaw again at the bin, and Gunner decides to show Shaw some of his illustrations and have him give a response to each one. Gunner shows him the last one, which is an unfinished drawing of Gunner. Shaw says that he hasn't completed it and says yes when Gunner encourages him to do so. 50% go fish, 50% illustration analysis, 100% boredom. So then we have the Women's Championship. Angelina Love defending against Madison Rayne. Terrible match. The storyline progression that occurred during the match was more significant than the match. After Brittany spent time at ringside not involving herself in the match, just as Madison said, Velvet Sky injected herself by spraying Madison's face, which allowed Angelina to roll her up and get the pin. Now, will Madison react to Brittany not helping her? So then we see the Black Brigade approach Ethan Carter III. And Montel Porter wants to know if Ethan is going to be at their level in the main event. Ethan reminds him that he hasn't lost and walks off. So then we see Madison Rayne and Brittany backstage. Madison is pissed and wants to know why Brittany allowed Velvet to spray her. Brittany reminds her that she was told to do nothing and leaves. What does Madison do now? Does she realize that she needs Brittany's help and accepts her as her partner in order to battle Angelina and Velvet, thus leading into the teased lesbian dance? If so, expectations must be met. So then we had the main event, an 8-man first blood match. The Black Brigade and Ethan Carter III versus Bully Ray, Eric Young, Austin Aries, and Samoa Joe. Decent match. The match ends with Bully Ray hitting Ethan with a chain, causing Ethan to bleed. Barely. The winners of the match were the good guys, but that's just it. Only one man had to bleed for this match to be decided. Why wasn't this a match in which all 4 wrestlers on one team have to bleed in order for the match to be decided? Because wrestlers on the other team would have to bleed in order to keep it interesting as to which team would win, and that many wrestlers won't be bleeding because it's not the 80s anymore. For the record, a stipulation match such as this would be better suited for pay-per-view, if done properly. Instead, we saw a TV match that was a standard 8-man tag in which there was no effort to cause anyone to bleed until the cheap finish that concluded the match. This was an example of misperception wrapped around an unrealistic presentation of a gimmick match. So then we see the Black Brigade beating up Ethan, and Dixie appears telling Porter that she wants to take out the brigade. Porter tells her that the battle for juice means that the red will flow. And Dixie responds by saying that it will flow. Show ends. This may be the birth of a three-way battle for the TNA power. The three entities being the Black Brigade, the possible reformation of Dixieland, and the Faces, led by the world champion Eric Young. It may appear intriguing on paper, but could we see something that doesn't appear on paper? Uncertainty. Eric Young and the Good Guys outnumber both heel groups, which means that each would have to restock. The potential problem is that three large groups could suck the energy away from the other creative tanks. This is what happened with Aces and Eights versus Team TNA. This is not to say that the same result would occur, but it could. One would say that changing the past results in the present being changed. If this three-way is in TNA's future, it may be time to change the present. I'm Tazmar 2002, and that's my TNA Impact Analysis for June 5th, 2014. If you're listening to me on YouTube, please leave your comments below. Click the like or dislike button. If you subscribe, I'd really appreciate it. If you're listening to me on the Wrestling News Talk Facebook page, leave your comments below and click the like button if you like what I've been saying. If you have any questions or comments for me about TNA or wrestling in general, you can get at me on Twitter. Tazmark2002, that's TAZMARK2002. And if your comments exceed the 140, get at me with an email. Tazmark2002@gmail.com. And be sure to watch the TNA Impact review that I do with Chuck P. live every Sunday morning at 11 o'clock Eastern Time on Chuck P's YouTube channel. And if we're not on Sunday, be sure to watch us on Monday at the same time. It was an okay show. Okay show. It was recently reported that Terrence Harrell will appear at the Impact tapings in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania following Slammiversary. Of course, this will immediately launch the anticipation for the third meeting between Terrence Harrell and Gail Kim. This is a match that doesn't necessarily need to equal the stellar Last Woman Standing match at last year's Slammiversary, or the equally superb ladder match on Impact which followed. But it has to be good enough to renew the exciting rivalry that both women have. But there are three problems. First, Gail Kim is a fucking face. For this match to have the physicality as well as the psychology of the previous two matches, Gail must return to her true role as the nucleus of the women's division. That means she must be a heel so that she can put over the face. Second, this match should happen at Bound for Glory, but it won't. And that is a result of, third, the lack of women in the division. Without more women in the division, Gale and Terran will have to face each other much sooner than they should. And everything will feel rushed instead of being burned slowly as it should. Gale versus Terran at Bound for Glory. It could still happen, but it won't be the third time. I'm Tazbart 2002. Gone.